You've reached Conversation with Mr. A. This is your host, Anthony Apostilla. Thank you for listening. Let's get right to the episode. Welcome to another edition of Conversations with Mr. A. For my guest this week, this is Lindsey Phillips. She has been a social worker. She helps out as a mentor towards upcoming social workers coming in. Lindsey, thank you so much for doing this interview.
Of course, glad to be here.
So for those who may not be familiar with social work, can you explain a little bit what social work is and what does a social worker do?
So that's a really big question because it's going to look different depending what you're really, really passionate about. But the bare bones of what being a social worker is engaging with people, whether that's families, kids, adults, groups, or communities, and advocating for people who are unable to do so. And that might include like something more on the one-on-one level, like counseling. It could be more bigger advocacy groups, looking at maybe school interventions, and then even looking at like the macro level of getting involved with politics, government level, making changes with laws, making changes with policies. So it's incredibly vast, but really kind of the heart of it is engaging and advocating for those who, for whatever reason, aren't able to or are disenfranchised, but need support to have a good, healthy, independent life.
What originally brought you into the field of social work?
So I was really actually kind of drawn towards working one-on-one with kids. So I wanted to work with kids, enjoyed them, seeing them grow, seeing them learn, and through some initial work in a kids' mental health setting, really understanding that in order to help kids, you actually need to help their families almost more. Because they're only in school for so much time, they're only seeing a therapist for so much time. But if you want to make the biggest impact on kids, you need to make sure they have a healthy, stable family, parents. And so I got into looking at engaging with whole families. And so got into social work when I was looking into kind of what jobs are out there and what the education requirements were. And that's where I found out about the Master's of Social Work degree. Because really, there's only so much you can do sometimes with a bachelor's degree. But looking into grad school and all of the impact you can do with the social work degree, because it's so broad, is how kind of my entrance into it. Because I had considered, marriage and family therapy, school counseling as master's degree options. But really, what drew me to social work was how broad it was, because when you engage into that, you can do all those things once you get the skill set. It gives you the foundational learning to potentially move into clinical social work. And if you want to be a counselor, there's social work in school, so you can make that transition as well. So you have the ability to change your career around, have more options, but then still have that basis of that master's degree to have that step into all those positions.
How many years were you a social worker?
So I guess it depends how you count when you become a social worker. Okay. But I did more kind of individual mental health services type work from 2011 to 2015. And it was in 2015 that I actually started doing work that I would consider more social work. So that has been about 8-9 years.
Okay. So what were some of the rewards and some of the challenges that you faced being a social worker that you encountered?
So thinking back to, I did a number of years working in public child welfare. So working with kids where there are allegations of abuse or neglect, and then you're assessing those situations, or working with families where another social worker had already determined the kiddos were unsafe and they had to be removed from the home. And so I was working with kids that were in foster homes or maybe with grandma, grandpa, things like that. So working with those kids, I think some of the hardest things is sometimes they'd be asking questions about, what happens next, and honestly not being able to tell a kiddo, I don't know where you're going to be tomorrow. I don't know if, if a placement doesn't come through. Maybe we had kiddos placed with relatives fall ill. And so then we're looking at, can we have to find you a foster placement? Because right now the courts don't believe that your parents are able to care for you right now. And so we're finding another place where your parents work and learn on things they need to work on. But I don't necessarily know where you're going to be tomorrow. And so that's not what I tell them, obviously, but just the unknown, and knowing that that's their whole world and you don't have an answer of what is going to happen next. Those are really hard times.
Was it hard to detach emotionally on a few occasions?
Oh, absolutely. That you're really incredibly emotionally involved with the families you're working with. For me, especially the kids that you're working with, because they're in a situation that it's not of their making, and so you're really, really invested with them. And sometimes you're still thinking about them when you're driving home, while you're getting ready to go to bed, thinking about what the other options are. Waking up at 2 a.m. and I didn't do this. Maybe I need to think about this when I go back to work tomorrow, and then jotting down a note for yourself or putting a note into your phone to look into. So it's really hard to compartmentalize that. So that can be incredibly exhausting or draining if you don't have a skill set to take, talk to somebody else, take a break, do what you need to do, so that you don't burn out too quickly.
What were some of the rewards that you encountered?
Seeing kiddos go back home to their parents, seeing parents learn new skills, engage with you. You're coming in from a point where at the beginning of a case, it very much feels us versus them. So us being, like a department worker versus, them being a parent or them being the parent's attorney. But seeing the transition of working together, we're working for the same goal. We want the kiddos to be home with you as a parent. So seeing that transition happen when parents were being successful, they're learning new ways to cope. They're having, long-term sobriety, getting new skills on how to redirect kids' behaviors, because some of those kiddos had really challenging behaviors. And so having, parents learning how to handle that, but seeing parents progress, seeing kids progress. I think some of the biggest kind of small things that really get you through the day is when you see a kiddo finally open up to you, or a parent be willing to kind of trust you a bit. So kind of seeing their change with you and knowing of we're going to be able to team together and make something change here. Those are really, really special days.
I'm assuming building that rapport was very important.
Yes, that rapport piece is huge. You're going to be so much more successful working with the family if you're able to build that rapport. And I don't know, it goes both ways. If you're building trust in them and they're building trust in you, and when you're able to get someplace together, that's really huge.
How did you deal with those that were maybe a little bit difficult? Maybe those that maybe were a little bit uncooperative, or they had that mindset, us versus them.
So those were the ones that, when I was able to get them a little, maybe not on my side, but at least have them see my side on things, those were the biggest accomplishments. And I just felt just really great to be able to get that, kind of like getting just a step in the door. And I think that's what it is just kind of, there's some families where it's a big accomplishment that they answered the phone. That could be the huge, big difference that it makes, because before maybe they were never going to answer your phone call. But that just having that one change of like, I went from them ignoring me to now I got a phone call, and then maybe next to let me into their home. And so having those kind of breaking it down into, what their own little goal is and how far I can kind of like, all right, what's next can I get with them? And I found it was a really rewarding challenge, those ones. So, and there were some ones, some parents that was really difficult with, and I needed to, after having a phone call with them, I had to hang up and I needed to take a break. I needed to walk around the block. I needed to talk with my coworkers, and kind of just like kind of let some of that stress out, because it is really hard. So, and sometimes, I was definitely not always successful by any means, but I took a lot of joy of being able to work with a parent, and then, after the end of a couple months, and have them, let them know, like, Lindsay, I really didn't like you. I'm just like, but I like, we've gone through a lot, and I think that, we're in a good place now. I'm like, that's an amazing feeling.
That's cool. That's cool. Now, we've talked a little bit about social worker almost in past tense, was and this. You have a little bit of a different role. Can you kind of expand a little bit on what you do now?
Yeah, so I worked in public child welfare, so kind of doing social work with Child Protective Services I did that for 8 years. And then I applied for a position to go work with University of Washington, Tacoma, which is where I got my master's degree, doing a position that helps facilitate and train and mentor students in the master's degree program who want to do public child welfare. Because it's it's really difficult work. It's really stressful. And there's a very high turnover rate. And so it's really incredibly important to have social workers that are properly trained. They have the skill set. They have a plan ahead of time already about how to address their burnout, because it will happen. It's not if, but it's when. And so to really train up social workers to go out into the field to do good work. And so I went from, supervising social workers in a field office in child welfare to then training and mentoring future social workers. And in my current role, I mentor social workers who may be already working in public child welfare but only have a bachelor's degree, so they're going back to school. Or I'm also working in training and mentoring students who aren't yet working for public child welfare, but intend to upon graduation. And so getting them prepared. And it's a really great blend, because I'm teaching classes, I'm leading seminars, but then I still have the opportunity to be in the field offices with the students, and making sure, connecting them with mentors, making sure they're learning about things. And since I'm just out of the field, I'm able to answer questions about how to do paperwork, how to use the computer system, what are the policies, because I'm very familiar with that. That was what I did for many years. So
now, for someone who wants to enter the social work field, and maybe someone who wants to even get their bachelor's degrees, what advice would you give an upcoming social worker?
One, do your research. Not every university has a bachelor's degree in social work, so that's going to be really important that you're going places that have that as an option for you. And I think really take advantage of your practicum or internship learning. That's a really key part of social work, is that going into the field and learning the information hands-on. And most programs would have a requirement to have that field experience that you're getting credit for. So I think it's really important to have that hands-on experience and not just the academic experience. It's the melding of the both. But, getting a school program and then being very selective about where you do your practicum, because that learning, that's where you're making your connections, that's where you're learning your skill set. And while the degree is incredibly broad, where you do your practicum, I think really directs you into what you're going to end up doing, because that's the specific skill you'll have and that you'll be marketable for that type of position. And maybe you look into a master's degree program that has 2 practicums. So some programs, they have advanced programs that are faster, but you only get 1 practicum experience. As opposed to maybe you take a slower program, a 3-year program, but if you get 2 different practicum experiences, that's going to really set you up, I think, to learn different skill sets, kind of get a feel of what are you better at? Because I think a lot of students come in and you have an idea of what you want to do. And as long as you're open, you actually find out, okay, that's what I wanted to do, but this is actually where my passion is, and I didn't even know this existed, but you had to be exposed to it. So I think that practicum piece, that hands-on learning, actually doing the job, is incredibly important, if not more important than the academic piece. So they go together, but it's that learning in person that is really going to change you, and really kind of, I think, direct you to where your next steps are going to be.
So it sounds like researching the school, where it sounds like that is really, really critical.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Now, one thing you mentioned earlier, I know you were talking a little bit about burnout, and just to go backwards a little bit, what are some of the things that you would do to handle burnout, or when you got burned out, what are some of the things that you found helpful?
I think find your people who understand what you're doing. So maybe you have a best friend, but if your best friend is an engineer, it's not the same. So I think you're going to find your peers either at work, or that maybe it's your supervisor at work. It doesn't necessarily have to be your supervisor. You're going to them for guidance, but maybe it's, like I said, it could be a peer. Maybe it's a friend you made in your social work program when you're getting your master's, that you can talk to about what you're going through. But I think that's incredibly key, is who are the people you can talk to kind of talk through situations. But then also being aware of like what are your own self-care needs. So for me, it was getting into yoga, jogging, doing some hiking, things like that. But then also being open to, just because this is what you're passionate about and you thought you would do this for 20 years, be open to, well, maybe I needed to switch the pace a little bit. I've been doing this for 3 years. Let's consider another position, and don't just do something that's going to lead you to burnout and then you're done, when you could find a new role, find a new position. Because I know for me, I took a couple different positions within child welfare. About every 3 years, I did something new. And I think that's incredibly important, because you're learning something new. It doesn't get redundant. Not really that social work can. But I think that helps when you're kind of switching positions around with the burnout.
Okay. All right, so we're almost towards the end. Let's have a little bit of fun. Let's lighten the interview up a little bit. I'm going to play a game called Word Association. So I'm going to give you some words, 1 or 2 words, and they're just random, off-the-wall topics. And then just tell me the first thing that comes to mind. Now, longtime listeners will know this. I say this every time. One thing that I do not like is pickles. It is a running gag joke. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of pickles?
Oh, Bloody Mary.
Okay.
I like pickled things in Bloody Marys.
Okay. Pizza.
Pizza, Hawaiian.
Okay. Horror movies.
Horror movies, Stranger Things.
Okay. Sports.
Ball.
Okay. Chocolate.
Shake.
Okay. Rap music.
No, thank you.
Okay. Bad hygiene.
Oh, stinky.
Okay. Animals.
Goats.
Self-confidence.
Ooh, empowerment.
Arrogance.
Ooh. Can I just say you?
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Social media.
Social media. Gosh, Facebook.
Okay. Romantic movies.
I was just watching about The Traveler's Wife, or the Time Traveler's Wife. I just saw some clips on that one.
Okay. Action movies.
Die Hard.
Good pick. Good pick. I like. Very good. Very good. Country music.
Oh, young Taylor Swift.
Young Taylor Swift. Okay. And last one. How about WWE or MMA?
No, thank you. I know that's your thing.
Me? Nah. Well, maybe a little bit. Okay. Any last words or things that you want to tell our listeners?
I think just be open when you're looking at your careers. And yeah, I think we put a lot of emphasis on knowing what we want to do right away, and I don't think that's realistic. And I know I changed up my ideas a couple times, and yesterday I was at orientation at our school, and seeing students of all different ages, 19-year-olds coming in, but also people well into their 40s and 50s getting their master's degree. And I think that's awesome. I think you're never too late to switch up careers, to try something new, to go back to school if that's what you want to do. So if you don't know what you want to do, that's fine. And life changes, and maybe it'll be something different in 10 years.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Lindsey, for your time.
You're welcome.
And that concludes this edition of Conversations with Mr. A with Lindsey Phillips. Thank you, Lindsey, for sharing your insight of just, your career working as a social worker and now mentoring others. And I really appreciated what Lindsey said about just when you're going for a career, just never be afraid to try different things and broadening your options. And so, everyone, just thank you for listening for this episode. Hopefully, we'll have more to come. Take care.